Imagine it is a cold winter night in Paris in 2008. The snow is mixing with rain. You are standing on a street corner, freezing, wearing a nice suit. You have money in your pocket. You are willing to pay for a ride, but you cannot get one. You watch empty taxis drive by, but they refuse to stop. You see other people fighting over the few cabs that do stop. You are trapped. The system is broken. Standing on that corner were two friends. One was a quiet millionaire named Garrett Camp. The other was a loud, aggressive salesman named Travis Kalanick. They were frustrated, and in that moment of frustration, they asked a simple question. Why couldn't I just push a button on my phone and get a ride? That question started a war. It would lead to the biggest battle in the history of transportation. It would involve fighting city governments, evading the police, spying on competitors, and burning billions of dollars in cash. It would create a company worth more than Ford and General Motors combined. But it would also create a culture so aggressive that it eventually ate its own founder alive. This is the story of Uber. It is not a story about technology. It is a story about breaking the rules. It is the story of how a street fighter named Travis Kalanick decided that it was better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. This story is 7 chapters long, and we know you are going to love it. Chapter 1. Every great company needs 2 things: a great idea and a person crazy enough to force that idea onto the world. Rarely is this the same person. In 2008, Garrett Camp was already rich. He had just sold his first company, StumbleUpon, for $75 million. He was a quiet man. He liked luxury, he liked systems. He was the kind of guy who would sit in a room and think about how to make things perfect. Garrett was obsessed with the taxi problem. In San Francisco, getting a cab was a nightmare. The taxi drivers were rude, the cars were dirty, the credit card machines were always broken. The city government limited the number of taxi licenses to keep prices high. It was a monopoly that hated its customers. Garrett had an idea. He wanted to create a private car service that felt like being a VIP. He imagined a fleet of black Mercedes cars that you could call with an iPhone app. No cash, no waving your hand on the street, just a button. He called it Uber Cub. But Garrett Camp did not want to run a company. He didn't want to fight with city mayors or yell at drivers. He was an inventor. He needed a general. Enter Travis Kalanick. Travis was not rich. He was struggling. He was a born hustler who had spent 10 years fighting huge battles. His first company, Scour, was sued by every movie studio in Hollywood and went bankrupt. His second company, Red Swoosh, survived, but it was a brutal, painful grind that left him exhausted. Travis was aggressive. He was loud. He loved conflict. He believed that life was a zero-sum game. If you win, I lose. When Garrett showed Travis the prototype for UberCab, Travis wasn't sure. He thought it was just a small luxury service for rich people. But then, Travis looked at the math. He looked at the taxi industry. He realized that the taxi companies were lazy. They had no competition because the law protected them. Travis realized that if he could use technology to break that protection, he wouldn't just build a car service. He would break the city's control over transportation. Garrett Camp brought the elegance and the app. Travis Kalanick brought the fight. They agreed to start the company. But right away, they made a decision that would define everything that happened next. They looked at the laws in San Francisco. The laws said that to run a car service, you needed a special license, a dispatch office, and expensive insurance. It would take years to get approved. Travis Kalanick looked at the laws and said, no. He decided they would not apply for a license. They would not ask the city for permission. They would just launch the app and see if the police could stop them. This decision to ignore the law and move fast was the birth of the Uber playbook. In the summer of 2010, UberCab officially launched in San Francisco. It did not start with a big commercial on TV. It started with a whisper among the tech crowd. Imagine the first time you used it. Before this, if you wanted a cab, you had to stand on a curb, wave your arm, and hope. Maybe a car stopped. Maybe it didn't. If it did stop, the car was often smelly, and the driver would get angry if you tried to pay with a credit card. UberCab was different. It felt like magic. You opened your phone. You saw a little car moving on a map. You pressed a button. 5 minutes later, a sleek, black Lincoln Town car pulled up. The driver opened the door for you. He offered you water. He called you by your name, and when the ride was over, you just walked away. No cash, no counting change. The payment happened invisible in the background. People didn't just like it. They became addicted to it. They felt powerful. They felt like rich VIPs for the price of a slightly expensive taxi ride. But there was a group of people who did not think this was magic. They thought it was a crime. The San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, SFMTA, and the California Public Utilities Commission were the watchers. Their job was to protect the taxi system. They looked at UberCab and saw a company breaking every single rule in the book. Uber didn't have taxi medallions. They didn't have taxi insurance. They didn't inspect the cars the way the city did. In October 2010, just a few months after launch, the city sent a letter to the Uber office. It was a cease and desist order. This is the most scary letter a business can get. It didn't ask them to change. It ordered them to stop everything immediately. The letter said that UberCab was running an illegal taxi service. For Garrett Camp, the rich inventor, This was a nightmare. He didn't want to go to jail. But for Travis Kalanick, this was the moment he had been waiting for. Travis looked at the letter. He looked at the law. The law said that only licensed taxicabs could use the word cab in their name. Travis realized that the city was fighting a definition. They were saying, "You are a taxi company." Travis decided to change the definition. He said, "No, we are not a taxi company. We do not own cars. We do not employ drivers. We are a technology company. We just make a piece of software that introduces a rider to a driver." This was a clever, tricky argument. It was the core of their defense. So, instead of shutting down the company, Travis did something bold. He simply changed the name. He removed the word cab from the logo. The company became just Uber. He ignored the order to stop driving. He told his team to keep the cars on the road. He bet everything on one simple idea. The customers love us more than they love the law. He believed that if enough people in San Francisco fell in love with the service, the city wouldn't dare to shut them down because the voters would get angry. He was right. The rides kept happening. The fines piled up, but the police did not raid the office. Travis had won the first round. He learned that the laws were not walls. They were just suggestions. Now, he was ready to take this war out of San Francisco and bring it to the toughest, most protected taxi market in the world, New York City. Chapter 2. Travis Kalanick had survived the fight in San Francisco. He proved that, if you have enough happy customers, the government is afraid to shut you down. But Travis did not want to be the king of one city. He wanted to be the king of the world. He looked at the map. Every major city, New York, Chicago, London, had the same problem. The taxi business was controlled by a small group of rich owners who paid politicians to keep competition out. In New York City, this system was called the medallion system. To drive a yellow taxi in New York, you needed a medallion. A medallion is a small metal plate on the hood of the car. It looks like a piece of tin, but in 2011, one single medallion cost $1 million. This price was artificial. The city strictly limited the number of medallions. This kept the price high and protected the owners. It was a closed fortress. Travis Kalanick knew he could not knock on the front door of the fortress and ask to come in. The taxi owners would just laugh at him. So Travis created a system of war. He called it principled confrontation. His employees just called it the playbook. The playbook was a secret guide on how to break into a city that didn't want you. It relied on speed, secrecy, and aggressive recruiting. Here is how it worked. Uber would hire a launcher. A launcher was usually a young person, maybe 24 or 25 years old. They were smart, hungry, and willing to work 18 hours a day. Travis would give them a suitcase of cash, a laptop, and a one-way plane ticket to a new city, like Chicago or Boston. The launcher had one mission: build a ghost fleet. The launcher would land in the city and stay in an Airbnb. They would not call the mayor. They would not call the taxi commission. They went straight to the drivers. But they couldn't advertise openly. If they put up a billboard saying "Drive for Uber," the city would shut them down before they started. So, the launcher had to be a spy. They would go to the airport holding lots, where the black car drivers waited for customers. The launcher would walk up to the drivers and whisper. They would say, "Hey, you have downtime in your schedule. I can fill those empty hours with rides. I can make you an extra $500 a week. Just download this app." They handed out iPhones loaded with the Uber driver app. They signed up hundreds of drivers in secret meetings in coffee shops and hotel rooms. Then, the launcher solved the chicken and egg problem. This is the hardest part of starting a marketplace. Riders won't open the app if there are no cars. Drivers won't turn on the app if there are no riders. Travis solved this with money. He told the launchers to pay the drivers just to sit in their cars. Even if they didn't get a single ride, Uber paid them $30 or $40 an hour just to have the app on. This meant that when the launcher finally announced, "Uber is now in Chicago," and the first customer opened the app, they saw a map full of cars. It looked like a massive, established company had arrived overnight. The customers would take their first ride. It was clean, it was fast, it was cheap. They fell in love instantly. By the time the mayor and the taxi owners realized what was happening, it was too late. Uber already had 10,000 users in the city. If the mayor tried to ban the app, those 10,000 voters would get angry. Travis Kalanick realized that it is much harder for a politician to take away something people love than to stop it from starting. He had found the weakness in the system. He was invading cities faster than the laws could be written to stop him. But as Uber grew bigger, the enemies got stronger. When he saw Uber arrive, he didn't see innovation. He saw an illegal bandit operation. Linton decided that sending letters was not enough. He needed to strike fear into the drivers. He launched a sting operation. It was January 2012. An Uber driver would get a request on his phone. It looked like a normal customer. The driver would drive to the pickup spot, usually a nice hotel or a busy street corner. When the driver arrived, a passenger would get in. But before the car could move, police cars would surround the vehicle. The passenger was actually a taxi inspector. The inspectors would force the driver out of the car. This was terrifying for the drivers. These were regular people trying to make extra money. Now, their cars were in a police lot, and they owed thousands of dollars. Travis Kalanick heard about the stings. Most CEOs would panic. They would pull out of the city to protect their employees. Travis did the opposite. He told his team, pay the fines, get the cars back, keep driving. Uber paid every single ticket. They paid for every tow truck. They told the drivers, if you get arrested, we have your back. Travis treated the fines not as a punishment, but as a cost of doing business. But Ron Linton and the city council had a bigger weapon. If they couldn't scare the drivers, they would change the law to destroy the business model. The DC City Council proposed a new law. It was called the Uber Amendment. The law said that a sedan service like Uber could exist, but it was not allowed to be cheap. The law required Uber to charge 5 times the price of a taxi. This would kill the company instantly. No one would pay $50 for a ride that cost $10 in a taxi. Travis Kalanick realized that he couldn't win this fight in a courtroom. He had to win it on the streets. He realized he had a secret weapon that the politicians didn't understand. He had a direct line of communication to the voters. The app? Travis told his engineers to change the app for every user in Washington, D.C. When a customer opened Uber that morning, they didn't see the normal map. They saw a dark screen with a message, Save Uber. The app explained that the city council was about to vote on a law that would destroy Uber. It said, if you want to keep riding, you need to tell them. Then, Travis added a button. It was a simple button that said, contact your council member. When a user pressed that button, it automatically wrote an email to the specific politician representing that user's neighborhood. The result was a digital avalanche. The city council members were sitting in their offices, drinking coffee, getting ready to vote. Suddenly, their phones started buzzing. Then their computers started dinging. Travis Kalanick had proven a new, powerful truth. If you make a product that people love, the customers will fight the government for you. He had turned a taxi app into a political machine, but Travis was starting to feel invincible. He believed he could beat any law and any politician. This confidence led him to create a piece of software that crossed the line from aggressive to spying. Chapter 3 By 2014, Uber was fighting a war on hundreds of fronts. In cities like Portland, Oregon, and Austin, Texas, the local governments were furious. They knew Uber was operating illegally, and they were determined to stop it. The police and taxi inspectors had learned from the early days. They stopped sending letters and started getting smart. The inspectors realized that the Uber app was an open door. All they had to do was download the app, create an account, and call a car. When the driver arrived, they handed him a ticket and took his car away. It was too easy. If the police kept doing this, the drivers would get too scared to work. Without drivers, Uber would die. Travis Kalanick needed a shield. He needed a way to stop the police from using his own app against him. He went to his engineers and asked a crazy question. Can we teach the app to recognize a police officer? The answer was yes. The engineers built a piece of software that was secretly added to the Uber system. Internally, they called it VTOS, which stood for Violation of Terms of Service, but the team had a nickname for the people they were trying to block. They called them Grayballers. And so, the tool became known as Grayball. Grayball was like a digital magic trick. It was designed to show a different version of reality to people who wanted to hurt the company. Here is how the spies at Uber found the police. First, they looked at the map. They drew digital circles around police stations and government buildings. If a user opened the app inside that circle frequently, the system flagged them as a suspect. Second, they looked at the money. Police officers usually paid for these sting operations with credit cards tied to a police credit union or the city government. Uber's system scanned the credit card numbers and flagged them. Third, they looked at the phone itself. Inspectors often bought cheap, throwaway phones, called burner phones, to create fake accounts. Uber's engineers could see the device model. If a user was sitting in a city hall building using a cheap phone just to look at the map, they were tagged. Once a user was tagged as police, the Grayball software kicked in. When that police officer opened the Uber app, everything looked normal at first. They saw the map, they saw little cars moving around on the screen, but the cars were ghosts. The software generated fake images of cars to make it look like the service was busy. But when the officer tapped the button to request a ride, the app would do one of two things. Sometimes it would just say, no cars available. Other times, the app would pretend to look for a driver, but it would never find one. The officer would stand on the curb, watching the little ghost cars drive past him on the screen, wondering why no one was stopping. Meanwhile, the real Uber drivers were driving right past the officer. The system hid the officer's request from the real drivers to protect them. It was a game of cat and mouse, but the mouse had built an invisible wall. In cities like Portland, the regulators were confused. They knew Uber was operating. They could see people getting out of black cars. But every time they opened their phones to catch them, the app was empty. For Travis Kalanick, this was a brilliant survival tactic. He viewed it as protecting his partners, the drivers, from unjust laws. But to the outside world, this was something much darker. This wasn't just ignoring a law. This was active deception. A multi-billion-dollar company was using its data and its code to spy on government officials and obstruct justice. They had crossed a line. They were no longer just a startup fighting for survival. They were acting like a sovereign nation with their own intelligence agency. And while they were fighting the police in the streets, a new enemy appeared that they could not grayball. Another company had started in San Francisco. They had pink mustaches on their cars. They were friendly, they were cheap, and they were stealing Uber's drivers. The war with Lyft was about to begin. Travis Kalanick had built a fortress. He had the Uber playbook for invading cities, and he had the Grayball tool to hide from the police. He felt like he owned the road. But in 2012, he looked in his rearview mirror and saw something that made him furious. It was a car with a giant, fuzzy pink mustache on the front grille. This was Lyft. Lyft was created by two nice guys, Logan Green and John Zimmer. They were the opposite of Travis. They didn't want to build a luxury black car service for rich people. They wanted to build a friendly community. In a Lyft car, you didn't sit in the back seat like a boss. You sat in the front seat like a friend. You fist bumped the driver. It was casual, it was fun, and most importantly, it was cheap. Travis Kalanick looked at that pink mustache, and he didn't see a funny joke. He saw a weed growing in his garden. He knew that if Lyft survived, Uber would never be a monopoly. If there were two apps, the customers would just compare prices and pick the cheapest one. That would ruin Uber's profits forever. Travis decided that he couldn't just beat Lyft. He had to kill them. He launched a secret project inside Uber. It was called Operation Slog. This operation was not about building a better app. It was about stealing the most valuable thing Lyft had: their drivers. Uber knew that a driver is a free agent. They can work for anyone. If Uber could get all the drivers to switch sides, Lyft customers would open their app, see no cars, and switch to Uber. Travis sent his brand ambassadors, which was a fancy name for his street team, out to war. They used burner phones and fake credit cards. They would order a Lyft ride. When the car arrived, the Uber employee would get in the back seat, but they wouldn't go to a destination. They would sit there and pitch the driver. They would say, "Hey, I see you are driving for Lyft. Did you know Uber will give you a $500 bonus right now if you sign up with us? We have more rides. We have better pay. Why are you wasting your time with the pink mustache?" They did this thousands of times. They clogged up the Lyft network with fake rides that were really just job interviews. But Travis didn't stop at the drivers. He went after the money. To build a ride-sharing company, you need billions of dollars from investors. You need that cash to pay for advertising and insurance. Travis Kalanick went to the biggest investment firms in Silicon Valley. He walked into their boardrooms and gave them a simple, threatening choice. He said, "You can invest in Uber, the winner, or you can invest in Lyft, the loser. But you cannot do both. If you give $1 to Lyft, you are dead to me. You will never see a penny of Uber's success." Because Uber was growing so fast, the investors were terrified of missing out. So, many of them said no to Lyft. This tactic is called a capital blockade. It is like cutting off the enemy's supply of food and water. Travis was trying to starve Lyft to death before they could even grow up. By 2014, Uber was raising more money than any startup in history. They had billions in the bank. Lyft had millions. Travis decided to use his massive bank account to launch the final attack. He started the price war. He lowered the price of an Uber ride so much that it was cheaper than taking a bus. It was cheaper than owning a car. Here is the crazy part. The price was lower than the cost of the ride. If you paid $10 for a ride across town, it actually cost Uber $15 to pay the driver and cover the insurance. Uber was losing $5 on every single trip. Travis didn't care. He had billions of dollars from investors. He could afford to lose money for years. He knew Lyft had less money. He calculated that if he kept the prices low enough, long enough, Lyft would run out of cash and go bankrupt. This was not a competition about who had the best technology. It was a competition about who could bleed the longest without dying. Travis was winning the war on the streets. But his aggressive, win-at-all-costs attitude was creating a rot inside his own company. The culture of breaking rules was starting to poison the people who worked there. And soon, a scandal would happen that had nothing to do with cars and everything to do with how Uber treated people. Chapter 4. By the end of 2014, Travis Kalanick was on top of the world. He had beaten the taxi cartels. He was starving Lyft of cash. He had billions of dollars in the bank. But inside the company, the culture of war was starting to rot. Travis had built a company based on a simple rule: always be hustling. He hired people who were aggressive, loud, and willing to break rules. He called this principled confrontation. But when you hire thousands of people who love to fight, Eventually they stop fighting the enemy and start fighting everyone else. The problem was that Uber didn't just want to win, they wanted to destroy anyone who criticized them. And the biggest critics were journalists. Reporters had started writing stories about Uber's dark side. They wrote about the GodView tool that let employees spy on politicians. They wrote about how Uber didn't do enough to check the safety of drivers. Travis Kalanick didn't see these reporters as people doing their job, he saw them as opponents in the game, and in Travis's mind, you destroy your opponents. This attitude led to the famous dinner party scandal. It was a rainy night in New York City. A very rich, very powerful Uber executive named Emil Michael was attending a fancy dinner. Emil was Travis's right-hand man. He was the deal-maker. The dinner was full of important people, media owners, actors, and rich influencers. It was supposed to be a private, friendly conversation, but Emil Michael was frustrated. He was angry about a specific female journalist named Sarah Lacey, who had been writing tough stories about sexism at Uber. In between bites of expensive food, Emil Michael dropped a bombshell. He told the people at the table that Uber should stop complaining about the press and start fighting back. He said he wanted to take $1 million of Uber's money and hire a special team of researchers. He said this team's job would be to dig up dirt on the families of journalists who criticized Uber. He specifically mentioned Sarah Lacey. He suggested they could look into her personal life and find something embarrassing to shut her up. He didn't know that a reporter from BuzzFeed was sitting right there, listening to every word. The next day, the story hit the news. The headline wasn't about a new app feature, it was, Uber executive suggests digging up dirt on journalists. The reaction was explosive. For years, the media had loved Uber. They thought it was a cool, rebellious startup. But now, they saw something different. They saw a trillion-dollar bully that was threatening to stalk the families of reporters. It was a PR disaster. Users started deleting the app. Politicians who used to support Uber started asking tough questions. Travis Kalanick had a choice. He could fire Emil Michael and prove that Uber had morals. Or, he could protect his friend and prove that winning was the only thing that mattered. Travis chose the fight. He kept Emil Michael. He sent out a series of tweets saying the comments were terrible, but he refused to fire him. This sent a clear message to every employee at Uber. There are no consequences for bad behavior, as long as you are making money. This decision was the crack in the foundation. The public now knew that Uber was dangerous. And inside the company, the bad behavior was about to get much, much worse. While the executives were fighting the media in New York, a young engineer named Susan Fowler was walking into the Uber headquarters in San Francisco for her first day of work. She didn't know it yet, but she was the one who would finally burn the house down. In November 2015, a young engineer named Susan Fowler walked into the Uber headquarters in San Francisco. She was smart, quiet, and excited. She had just been hired to work on the site reliability team. This was a very important job. It was her job to make sure the Uber app never crashed. On her very first day, she sat down at her new desk. She opened her computer and logged into the company chat system. Almost immediately, she received a message from her new boss. It was not a welcome message. It was not about work. It was a message asking her for sex. Susan was shocked. She took a screenshot of the message. She knew this was against the rules. She knew it was illegal, but she wasn't worried because she trusted the system. She thought, I will just show this to human resources, and they will fire him. She walked into the HR office and showed them the proof. The HR woman looked at the messages. She admitted that it was sexual harassment. But then, she said something that Susan would never forget. She said, we are not going to fire him because he is a high performer. The HR manager explained that this boss was very good at his job, and made the company a lot of money. Because he was valuable to the business, they were going to forgive him. They told Susan that she was the one who had to change teams if she didn't like it. Susan was stunned. She realized in that moment that Uber had a broken moral compass. Making money was more important than following the law. She decided to stay and do her job, but she started watching. She noticed that she wasn't the only one. Other women were leaving the company constantly. One day, the director of her department announced that he was ordering leather jackets for all the engineers as a Christmas present. Everyone was excited, but when the jackets arrived, there were none for the women. Susan asked why. The director told her that there were too few women on the team to get the bulk discount price. He said that if the women wanted jackets, they would have to pay full price for them, while the men got theirs for free. It was a small thing, but it was a symbol. It showed that women simply didn't matter to the company. Susan Fowler quit Uber in December 2016. She sat down at her kitchen table and wrote a blog post. She titled it, Reflecting on One Very, Very Strange Year at Uber. She didn't use angry words. She didn't scream. She just wrote down exactly what happened, like a scientist recording facts. She wrote about the manager, the HR meeting, and the leather jackets. She hit publish on February 19, 2017. The reaction was nuclear. The blog post was read by millions of people. For years, the public had ignored Uber's bad behavior because the app was cheap and convenient. But this story was different. It showed a company that was cruel to its own people. A movement started on social media. It was called #DeleteUber. Thousands of people deleted their accounts in a single day. Celebrities criticized the company. The drivers were angry. Travis Kalanick, the tough street fighter, finally realized he couldn't fight this. He couldn't grayball a blog post. He couldn't bully Susan Fowler into silence. He panicked. He needed to show the world he was taking it seriously. He hired Eric Holder, the former Attorney General of the United States, to investigate his own company. This was a desperate move. It is like inviting the police into your house to look for crimes. Travis thought the investigation would save him. He thought Eric Holder would write a report, fire a few bad managers, and everything would go back to normal. He was wrong. The investigation was about to open the door for the people who really owned the company, the investors, to finally take out their knives. The money men were tired of the scandals. They were tired of the fighting, and they were ready to kill the king. Chapter 5. By early 2017, the investors of Uber were nervous. The hashtag Delete Uber movement and the Susan Fowler blog post had damaged the brand. But money is money. As long as Uber was growing, the investors, especially the powerful firm Benchmark Capital, were willing to stay quiet. Bill Gurley, the tall, serious partner at Benchmark, had backed Travis Kalanick since the beginning. He was Travis's mentor. He sat on the board of directors. He had defended Travis when the media attacked him. But then, a new scandal hit the company. And this one wasn't about mean tweets or bad culture, it was about theft. To understand this, we have to look at the biggest race in Silicon Valley, self-driving cars. Travis Kalanick believed that the future of Uber was not human drivers. Humans were expensive. They needed to sleep. They needed to eat. Travis believed that if he could replace the human with a robot, Uber would become the most profitable company on earth. But there was a problem. Google was winning the race. Google had been building self-driving cars for years. Uber was far behind. Travis was desperate. He didn't want to come in second place. So, he did what he always did. He tried to buy a shortcut. In 2016, Travis bought a tiny startup company called Otto. Otto was only 6 months old. It had no revenue. It had no finished product. Yet Uber paid $680 million for it. Why? Because Otto was owned by a star engineer named Anthony Levandowski. Levandowski was a genius. He was the man who had built Google's self-driving car. He was famous for moving fast and breaking rules, just like Travis. Travis thought he had bought a genius, but he had actually bought a ticking time bomb. In February 2017, just days after Susan Fowler's blog post, Google, now called Waymo, filed a massive lawsuit against Uber. The lawsuit told a story that sounded like a spy movie. It claimed that before Anthony Levandowski left Google to start his own company, he did something suspicious. He plugged a laptop into the Google servers. He spent hours downloading 14,000 highly secret files. These files contained the blueprints for Google's LiDAR systems, the laser eyes that allow a robot car to see the world. Google claimed that Levandowski stole these blueprints, started his own fake company, and then sold that company to Uber, so Travis Kalanick could use the stolen technology to catch up. This was a nuclear disaster for the investors. Bill Gurley and the partners at Benchmark Capital looked at the lawsuit. They were terrified. If Google won, a judge could force Uber to shut down its entire self-driving car division. Even worse, if Travis Kalanick knew about the theft when he bought the company, he could be personally liable for a crime. The investors realized that Travis's win at all costs attitude had finally crossed the line. He wasn't just ignoring taxi laws anymore. He was accused of stealing from one of the most powerful companies in the world. Bill Gurley tried to talk to Travis. He told him to fire Levandowski. He told him to cooperate with the court, but Travis refused. He protected Levandowski. He told the investors that Google was just jealous. He treated the lawsuit like a street fight, not a legal crisis. For Bill Gurley, this was the breaking point. He realized that Travis Kalanick was no longer a visionary leader, he was a liability. The relationship between the mentor and the student was dead. Bill Gurley went back to his partners at Benchmark and they started to whisper about the unthinkable, firing the founder. But before they could make their move, the chaos inside the company got even worse. The investigation into the toxic culture was finished, and the results were about to be read to the entire company in a meeting that would go down in history as a total disaster. It was June 2017. The investigation by former Attorney General Eric Holder was finished. He had spent months looking at every ugly part of Uber's business. He wrote a report that was 13 pages long. It was a list of demands. The report said Uber had to change everything. It said the company needed to stop partying. It said the company needed real rules. Most importantly, it said that Travis Kalanick had too much power. It recommended that his power be reduced. Travis read the report. He knew he was in trouble. But things were about to get worse because of a tragedy in his personal life. Just weeks before, his parents were in a terrible boating accident. His mother died, and his father was badly hurt. Travis was grieving. He was tired. He was fighting a lawsuit from Google and an investigation from the government. He decided to hold an all-hands meeting. This is a meeting where every single employee comes to listen. The goal was to apologize and promise a fresh start. Travis did not lead the meeting. Instead, Ariana Huffington took the stage. She was a famous media owner and a member of the Uber board of directors. She was there to be the adult in the room. She spoke to the employees. She told them that Uber was going to change. She said that the board would add more women to leadership positions. She made a point about diversity. She said, "There is a lot of data that shows when there is one woman on the board, it's much more likely that there will be a second woman on the board." It was an inspiring moment. She was trying to fix the sexism problem. And then, David Bonderman spoke. David Bonderman was a billionaire investor and a member of the Uber board. He was sitting right there on stage. When Ariana said that having one woman leads to more women, Bonderman interrupted her. He leaned into his microphone and made a joke. He said, "Actually, what it shows is that it's much more likely to be more talking." The room went dead silent. The employees could not believe it. They were sitting in a meeting about stopping sexism, and a board member just made a sexist joke about women talking too much. It proved that the rot wasn't just in the lower levels. It was at the very top. The people in charge didn't respect the problem. The news of the joke leaked instantly. The audio recording was on the internet within an hour. The employees were furious. The public was disgusted. David Bonderman resigned from the board that same day. For the investors at Benchmark Capital, this was the final signal. The company was out of control. The board was making mistakes. The CEO was distracted and toxic. Travis Kalanick realized he couldn't hold on anymore. He needed a break. He sent a letter to the staff. He announced that he was taking a leave of absence. He said he needed time to mourn his mother and work on himself. He told the employees that he would be back to run the company soon. He thought he was just pressing the pause button. He thought he would go away for a month or two, let things calm down, and then return as the king. But Bill Gurley and the partners at Benchmark Capital saw something different. They saw an open door. They knew that once the king leaves the castle, you can lock the gate behind him. While Travis was in Chicago, grieving his mother, and trying to escape the pressure, two partners from Benchmark got on a private jet. They flew to Chicago with a single piece of paper in their hands. It was not a get-well card. It was a resignation letter. Chapter 6. Travis Kalanick was in Chicago. He was trying to heal from the terrible loss of his mother and the wounds the company had suffered. He had announced a leave of absence, promising the world he would be back to lead Uber. He still saw himself as the king, but hundreds of miles away in Silicon Valley. The investors were moving like assassins. The man leading the charge was Bill Gurley of Benchmark Capital. Gurley, once Travis's strongest mentor and defender, had now become his main enemy. Gurley had seen the Waymo lawsuit, the Bonderman disaster, and the falling stock value. He knew the $70 billion company he had helped build was at risk of falling apart. He told his partners, "The company cannot fix its problems as long as Travis is still in charge." Gurley knew Travis would never step down willingly. He had to be forced. Working in secret, Gurley put together a small army of 5 major investment firms: Benchmark, First Round Capital, Lowercase Capital, Menlo Ventures, and Fidelity Investments. Together, they held enough power, about 40% of the voting shares, to make a very loud noise. They wrote a letter. It was 2 pages long, and it was direct. It blamed Travis for the legal risks, like the Waymo and Grayball scandals, and the damage to the company's reputation. It ended with a single, clear demand. Travis Kalanick must resign immediately as CEO. The letter was ready, but who would deliver it? Travis was in Chicago, hiding from the world. 2 partners from Benchmark's Matt Kolar and Peter Fenton boarded a private jet. Their mission was simple: fly to Chicago, find Travis, and give him the letter. This was not a business meeting. This was a coup. The 2 investors tracked Travis down to his hotel room in Chicago. When they walked in, Travis was likely distracted, probably working on ideas for Travis 2.0, the new, improved leader he promised to become. Kolar and Fenton handed him the 2 pages of demands. Travis Kalanick, the man who had fought taxi unions, governments, and Google, was now alone in a hotel room, reading his own firing notice delivered by his friends. He read the memo. The folksy tone of the letter was a mask. The demands were hard and final. The investors wanted him out of the chief executive seat that night. Travis was silent. He talked to the 2 men for about an hour, trying to argue his case. He tried to point out that he was the founder. He tried to say he just needed more time, but the investors had closed the door. They reminded him of the danger, the Waymo lawsuit, the pending criminal probe over Grayball, and the massive exodus of senior executives. They made it clear that if he didn't sign, the next step would be an ugly, public legal battle that would destroy Uber's value completely. Travis was grieving his mother. He was exhausted from 7 years of non-stop fighting. He had fought everyone, but he could not fight the people who held his company's money. He knew he had lost. After hours of thinking and phone calls with his allies, Travis Kalanick gave in. He signed the letter. That night, June 21, 2017, Uber issued a statement from its founder. Travis said, "I love Uber more than anything in the world, and at this difficult moment in my personal life, I have accepted the investors' request to step aside, ... Double quotes, the statement used the word request, but everyone knew it was a firing. The king was dead. Travis Kalanick was gone as CEO. But the story was not over. He still owned a huge part of the company, and he still had a seat on the board of directors. The fight for the soul of Uber was far from finished. Travis Kalanick was gone as CEO, but the war for Uber was not over. Even though he resigned, Travis still had immense power. He kept his seat on the board of directors, and even more dangerously, he controlled 3 extra board seats that he had convinced the board to create the year before. He believed that if he could pick the people for those seats, he could control the board and eventually vote himself back in as CEO. The investors who forced him out were furious. They knew that as long as Travis held this power, the chaos would never end. 2 months after the resignation, Benchmark Capital decided to launch the nuclear option. Benchmark, the company that had invested in Travis from the very beginning, sued him. The lawsuit was brutal. Benchmark accused Travis Kalanick of fraud. They claimed he had hidden the Waymo lawsuit, the Grayball scheme, and the toxic culture from the board just to trick them into giving him control over those 3 extra board seats. Benchmark wanted the court to rule that those 3 seats were illegal and strip Travis of his board membership forever. It was an ugly, public betrayal. The lawsuit marked the end of the founder's time at the company he had created. While the lawyers were fighting, the remaining board was trying desperately to find a new CEO. No one wanted the job. The company was toxic, being sued by Google, and had a founder trying to sabotage the search from the boardroom. The board needed someone completely different. They needed the Kalanick. They found him in Dara Khosrowshahi, or DK was the longtime CEO of Expedia, a successful travel website. He was a refugee who had fled Iran as a child. He was quiet, stable, and focused on making steady, careful growth. He was known for being kind to his employees. He was the opposite of the aggressive, fight-first culture of Uber. When Dara was offered the job, he was scared. He had to be convinced by friends that running Uber wasn't about being happy, but about having a massive impact on the world. He accepted the job, even giving up millions of dollars in stock options at Expedia to take the risk. When he walked into Uber headquarters for the first time in August 2017, he made a promise. We need to do the right thing, period. The new CEO immediately showed how different he was. Travis's company had been hiding a massive secret. In 2016, hackers had broken into Uber's systems and stolen the personal information of 57 million drivers and riders. Instead of telling the public, Travis's team had secretly paid the hackers $100,000 to delete the data and keep silent. This was a massive crime. Dara Khosrowshahi learned about the secret payment and the stolen data. His first major act as CEO was to tell the truth. He publicly disclosed the hack and apologized to the world. He said he was not going to make excuses. He said that hiding a problem was worse than having the problem. With that single act of honesty, Dara Khosrowshahi stopped the rot. He began the long, slow, boring work of cleaning up the company's mess, fixing the culture, settling the lawsuits, and hiring back the honest people who had left. The era of growth at any cost was over. The era of the unicorn company running wild was finished. The company had paid a huge price, the loss of its brilliant, chaotic founder, to finally grow up. Chapter 7. For 2 years, Dara Khosrowshahi, the new CEO, worked like a janitor cleaning up a stadium after a massive party. His job was to make Uber look and act like a respectable business, not a wild startup. He had 2 giant issues to solve before the company could reach its final goal. The initial public offering IPO. The first issue was the Waymo lawsuit. Google was still suing Uber for $1.8 billion, claiming that Travis Kalanick had knowingly bought stolen self-driving car blueprints. The case went to trial. Witnesses took the stand. The tension was immense. The whole world watched to see if Uber would be found guilty of corporate theft. But 5 days into the trial, CEO Dara Khosrowshahi decided to end the chaos. Uber and Waymo agreed to a settlement. Uber admitted no guilt, but they agreed to give Waymo $245 million in stock. It was a huge fine, but it was better than a massive court loss. The legal risk was finally off the table. The man at the center of the theft, Anthony Lewandowski, was fired. He later faced criminal charges for stealing the files. The lesson was clear. The company had paid $250 million because the founder valued winning over honesty. With the lawsuits mostly dealt with, it was time for the final event. For years, the IPO was the promise that kept the investors and employees loyal. It was the day the unicorn would become a public reality. It was the day everyone would get rich. On May 10, 2019, Uber began trading on the New York Stock Exchange. The excitement was massive. Uber had hoped to be valued at over $100 billion. The company priced its shares at $45 per share. This gave the company a valuation of $82.4 billion. It was still one of the largest IPOs in history, but it was much less than they had hoped for. The scandals, the lawsuits, and the fact that Uber still lost billions of dollars every year had scared Wall Street. Dara Khosrowshahi stood on the trading floor and rang the opening bell. Travis Kalanick, the man who had created the entire company, was in the crowd, watching silently. He had been banned from the stage. The stock began trading, and immediately, it went down. By the end of the day, Uber's stock closed well below the $45 price. The market was telling the world that this company, built on chaos and aggression, was still too risky. The era of the unicorn was over. Uber was now just a normal public company, forced to focus on small profits instead of big explosions. This financial moment was the final cue for Travis Kalanick. He was still on the board, but he had no voice. He was just watching his life's work being run by the man who cleaned up his messes. When the lockup period for insider shares ended in November 2019, Travis Kalanick began selling. Every day, he sold shares. In a matter of weeks, he sold his entire stake in the company. He walked away with over $2.5 billion. On December 31, 2019, Travis Kalanick officially resigned from the board of directors, severing all ties to the company he had co-founded. The founder's long, chaotic journey was finally complete. The story of the founding of Uber is not just a story about technology or money, it is a harsh lesson in causality. Every single strategy that Travis Kalanick used to create the company eventually led to his destruction. The same aggression that allowed Uber to beat the taxi cartels led to the Grayball Scandal, which terrified the investors. The culture of always be hustling led to the Susan Fowler blog post, which destroyed the company's reputation. The ambition to win at all costs led to the Waymo lawsuit, which put the company at risk of collapse. The biggest lesson from Uber's founding chaos is that culture is not a separate department. It is the product you build. Uber's product was an app that felt like magic, but the company's culture was a ticking time bomb. When the company went public on the stock market, Wall Street did not just look at the billions of dollars in revenue. They looked at the legal risk and the damaged reputation, and they judged the company to be worth billions less than the founders hoped. Travis Kalanick, the brilliant, ruthless founder, created a company that was too big to fail but too toxic to lead. He proved that you can beat the rules and survive any fight, but you cannot beat the market's demand for integrity. In the end, the investors, the people who funded the chaos, were the ones who ended it. They realized that a toxic founder was a threat to their money, and they had no problem taking their company back. Travis Kalanick walked away with billions of dollars. He later started a new company, but he lost the thing he cared about most: control over his masterpiece. Uber survived the chaos, but it became a different company. It is now run by a leader who focuses on steady profits and public apologies. The wild, rebellious startup that once terrorized cities is now just a transportation company forced to follow the rules. The ultimate legacy of the founding of Uber is simple: growth at all costs is a myth. When you cut corners on culture, you don't save time, you simply create a massive bill that you must pay later, often with your job. The company changed the world by making transportation instantly accessible, but the price of that revolution was paid by the founder, the employees, and the company's own reputation. The story of Uber is the definitive modern tale of how to build a giant empire and why the very thing that makes you king can be the thing that kills you.